Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming out on this frigid morning. Another one. This almost felt mild today, didn't it? Crazy, crazy. Anyway, thank you for coming because we have on the cold day a hot topic and a hot candidate. And we want to welcome our new county exec and hear what he has to say. But before, we're going to call on Jeff to have our tidbits.
With this crowd, I suspect you've heard about my tidbits. Actually, I'm not doing a tidbit this morning, even though George asked me in the last couple of days if I would do a tidbit, because I have this wonderful tidbit, but it's going to take away too much time. What I really want to do this morning is do a little bit of a promo, which involves George. He was inaugurated on January 7th. He is here today on January 16th. Last Thursday, he was at LMC-TV for our first interview. So in 9 days, LMC-TV has had George Latimer. We were there at the inauguration. I want to say, if you haven't seen the show last Thursday, it's our 200th local live show, with George being interviewed by Maura Carlin, one of our board members. It's a fabulous show. It's not just George, and by the way, he had about 15 Girl Scouts there too from the local Mamaroneck, they knew it was George. And we had proclamations from the two villages in the town and the county and the state. And one of the comments that I picked up on was Tom Murphy, who said, in past years at trustee meetings, there used to be 2 or 3 or 4 people there taking notes to be in the print media. No longer. There's no longer anybody sitting at those meetings with the print media. So this is my promo. If you want to get involved, you want to get involved in local news, we no longer have the Daily Times, the Standard Star, the Item. We have a local live show every Thursday night with local news. If you saw the show last week, we had Rebecca Bergman interviewing some of our interns, Ashley, James, and Alexandria. One is working as an associate producer at A&E. One is as an intern at Hardball, Chris Matthews. One is works for BronxNet TV. We also did a promo spotlight on Anthony Carlo, News 12 reporter. So I want to thank Shayla and Kat and Mike and Maura and Louis and Dina. And we always look for money, but what we look for is people to get involved. You want to operate a camera, you want to work on the script, you want to eventually get on the air, come see us at LMC-TV. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm now going to turn the program over to Nina Cuddy, who's going to introduce our program.
Morning, everyone. We, on a yearly basis, we invite the county executive. It's a pleasure to have a different county executive this year. But that's very partisan. I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, but what we've always done in the past, and what we want to continue to do, is we solicit from members of our board those issues that are of greatest concern to them. And the list is longer than what we presented to George. So if your question isn't here, save it for the Q&A right after. You don't get away with not asking more answering more questions, George. So I'm going to read to you so you know the format of what we were thinking and where we would like the things that are on our mind and we would like George to answer. So here we go. The passage of the new tax law is expected to adversely impact many county residents as it affects the deductibility of state and local taxes. How will this impact your budget planning, both with respect to any considered tax increases or any increase or decrease in county services? What steps would you consider taking to help residents who are confronting this new tax situation? Okay, question 2. In November, the former county executive announced the winning bid to run Westchester County Airport once it is privatized. What is the status of the airport privatization plan? Will the plan go forward as intended under the Astorino administration, or will you seek changes to the plan? The third question. What will the county policy with respect to county law enforcement cooperating with ICE in dealing with undocumented immigrants? And the fourth question is, will either or both the County Human Rights Commission and County Planning Commission be revitalized, and broadly, what direction do you want to take the county in that differs from your predecessor? Those are the four questions we sent, and yes, we did send a copy of this to George about a week ago, so it's not like he's surprised, okay? So thank you for coming, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you very much, Nina. Now, this is connected to LMC. This is not amplifying my voice in the room. This is how Howard Dean got into the scream. You know the story about Howard Dean's scream? He thought he was speaking into a microphone that magnified his voice in the room. So he said this, and he mentioned all those states. Only on television, it came off like he was a maniac. So I have to speak conversationally if I know this is a TV connection. First of all, I've been to, I don't know how many summit meetings over the course of the existence of this organization. I've been a guest a couple of times in the past, sometimes in a panel, sometimes to explain something like the state budget or the county budget when I was back in the county previously. But I would not be standing here if it were not for the people in this room. I don't assume automatically that everybody did support me, but the vast majority of you were there for me, and I know, because I've had one-on-one meetings with almost everybody in this room at some point in time in my career. And certainly over the last year, when I attended this, previously when Rob Astorino spoke, I sat in the back pretty much in that last row of tables, and the thought that I might be his opponent and that I might actually win that race seemed pretty far-fetched at the time. The politics of last year really began as an aftermath of the Trump election in 2016. But when I first decided to run in February, it was a long shot. It was pretty improbable. Whatever my degree of popularity might be in some places of the county, I was an unknown quantity in most of it. And Rob was very well known. And he had a 3-to-1 financial advantage over me, which he used. And the upshot of it is in some ways, it was almost unfathomable that I might be standing here today. So the fact that I am to talk about the direction of the county government is in great part because of many of you and all of the work that you put in to help me have this opportunity. And as I've said many times before, I said it in my inaugural, I never view election to public office as a blank check from the voters to the electeds. A lot of electeds in this room, and I suspect you feel the same way. What the election is a promissory note from me to you. The things that I say during a campaign, the things that I try to address in my both behavior and in the things I advocate are a promise that I will try to do these things if you give me this opportunity. And there is no room that I have more of a sense of obligation to than this room, because of the amount of work that you did as individuals to help me. And so I feel a tremendous obligation to deliver, so that over the course of months, 4 years of this term, you'll look and you'll say, I knew that guy and I helped him, and I'm glad I did. And that's very important to me. And there is one other thing about this, and then I'll get very specific. And I made this comment at a speech I gave recently as well. There is, if you're in the lobby of the 9th floor of the county office building, which I'm just now accustomed to for a couple of weeks, there are the pictures of my 8 predecessors as county executive on the wall. A couple of them I knew personally, worked with some of them. Most of them are historical figures to me, and probably to all of us in the room. And they were different, different political parties, different eras in which they governed. But they all had, certain basic things in common. They all had the same job that I have. They all had certain pressures and problems in their day, different, perhaps the same from the ones I face. They all had an agenda. They all had an opportunity to rule, and they all were replaced in due time. And I'm very conscious. I'm very conscious of that. We're in the process the next few months of electing a new state senator to represent this district. I took over, bless you, I took over from Susie Oppenheimer, who's state senator for 28 years, and she did a fabulous job. I had 5 years in that position. Now I will be replaced in that position by somebody else. Steve Otis, our assemblyman, terrific guy doing a terrific job, replaced me in that job. Catherine Parker is a twice replacement, Judy Myers in between. Nobody, bless you, nobody is indispensable. I'm certainly not indispensable. So what it tells me is that there's an urgency to do things. There's an urgency to use an opportunity that you've been given to use that well, so that when I see Ann McAndrews on a street in Larchmont, because we go to the same florist, or when I see, Bill Lawyer, who's here from Rye, a neighbor of mine in Rye, in some place in Purchase Street, that I know that I can defend how I use the authority that you gave me. And that is an important thing as a baseline to then discuss everything else. As we go forward, first of all, the first most important thing that I think we've tried to do from the moment of election is to try to set a different tone with a different set of philosophies. And I don't necessarily argue that there isn't an alternative philosophy that has its adherents and that it is as valid a philosophy as the one that I hold. But the bottom line is, on election night, the voters of the county gave me the opportunity to run this county for the next 4 years. And I intend to implement what I think I talked about in the campaign and the philosophy that I hold. And the philosophy that I hold is that government has a valid role to play in our everyday lives. It is not the dominant role. It is not meant to be the dominant role. But neither is it, as the alternative philosophy will argue, that it is the problem in our society, that there's simply, in principle, too much government and it needs to be generically reduced and generically eliminated from our lives. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I believe that is a strategy that advances a certain set of policies, and it works off of people's frustrations, because everything we try to do in this experiment for democracy are done by humans, and we're flawed, and we make mistakes, and we don't execute as well. There are people in this room who have a variety of professional experiences and responsibilities. You're trained to do that which you do, but you still make mistakes. There's still things that don't work out the way you intend for it to do. And the mistakes of government are, in my judgment, mistakes that can be corrected, and they are part of an overall strategy to address the problems that we have in our society. The society writ large, the society writ as small as these communities that we represent. So that change in philosophy meant that I established right after the election, a series of transition committees, issues committees, in which we involved and invited people from the communities of Westchester County to be involved in helping us shape public policy in a host of different areas. We created 6 committees: health, criminal justice, social services, economic development, operations, administration, and people like Dr. Betsy Rosenthal, who's sitting around the table, is involved in one of those committees. There are others in this room that have done so as well, and to try to shape a policy. And those policy recommendations from the Transition Committee will be out, I hope, by the end of this month. That's the target plan for it. It will be released to the public, and it will be, as far as I can tell, the first time that we use the transition period to involve residents to prioritize issues, so that people could say, this is what we should be doing in the health department, this is what we should be doing in the area of probation and corrections and up and down the line. And by doing that right off the bat, I basically argued for what I said during the campaign, that we intend for this to be as transparent an administration as possible, as energetic an administration as is possible, and hopefully by the end of the term, public policy that I think reflects the broad feelings of Westchester County. There's clearly a liberal-conservative divide in the society. I believe you can work across the aisle successfully. I've tried to do that in my career. But I also think the philosophy of trying to work together is to solve the problems, not to diminish government and to reduce it. And I do think that is a change in course in Westchester County. My predecessor, who I have complimented for his time in the arena, held a different philosophy. In his philosophy, and I'm not trying to change it, you've heard him speak here many times before, his mission was to reduce government services in order to have the least possible tax impact on individuals. And everyone will acknowledge that we pay high property taxes here, and we pay, a certain amount to have schools, a certain amount for county, and a certain amount for municipal government. But when I hear people, because of this recent tax change, compare our level of taxation to South Carolina, I have to jump in and say, I want you to compare the level of services in South Carolina. For those of us, and I hit 64 a couple of weeks ago, I am, by the way, for one of those future tidbits, Jeff, the oldest elected person ever to be elected county executive at age 63. And now I'm 64. Andy Spano was in office and was older than I am over time, but on the day of his election, he was younger than I was. So I sure waited long enough to get this job. But the bottom line is if you're in my age category, a little bit older, and you move to Hilton Head or Kiowa or Myrtle Beach, you do it at a time of your life when it makes sense for you to go to a warm climate, when you've made New York money and you want to spend it in a low-tax state because it's in your advantage to do that. That's the kind of decision, in my mind, that's equivalent to the decisions you make when you're in your 20s and you live in a beautiful suburb with mom and dad, but you want to be in Manhattan, because Manhattan is where it's at when you're 22 years old. When you're 32 years old and you've got the spouse and the kid, and you want the education and you want the recreation, then you're back in the suburbs. You make prudent decisions based on where you are in your life. You don't move to South Carolina. You can see I'm not going national by criticizing another state. You don't go to South Carolina in the middle of your 30s because the education system is better. You don't go to South Carolina in the middle in your middle 30 years because, unless it's unique, that because there's a job waiting for you that's a significant improvement over the job you have in Manhattan. I suppose it happens, but it doesn't happen very often. More often than not, you're in Nebraska or South Carolina, and the company says, you're doing great. We're moving you to the headquarters office in Manhattan. So we cannot reshape and should not reshape New York to be South Carolina. South Carolina's level of taxation is a lot lower. And if all you care about is taxation, skip South Carolina, go to North Dakota. North Dakota's taxation is the best going. And if you think it's cold now, try a winter in Fargo and see how much you like that. But I say that because the philosophy is to put into balance cost and value. Cost and value. What are the value of the services that we have? And if the decision in the society is to dramatically reduce your taxes, then you have to be prepared to accept dramatic reduction in services. And that's what the other philosophy doesn't want to talk about too much. We have a mass transit system that takes us into the city. How many of you have been on Metro North at some point in time in the last year? Raise your hand. How many of you have ever lived outside Houston, Texas? Raise your hand if you have. You have. Okay. Well, that's good. No, that's right. I worked for a corporation that was based outside of Houston, Texas for 11 years, and I'd go down a week a month for a fair bit of my time. There is no mass transit that takes you from suburban Houston into Houston. It's the city of Houston. You get in your car, get on your horse, whatever it is, and you find your way in. And the traffic in Houston is hellacious going in at the heart of rush hour. If you have a morning business meeting in the heart of Houston and you're out in the suburbs, it is a terrible trip to take it in. Texas taxes are low. Texas services are low. And so that is an argument in Westchester County that comes from a discussion that we have to have, because the other philosophy says that taxation and the reduction of taxation is all that we should be focused on. And if you're prepared to see your town government, your village government dramatically reduce services, then that's part of the discussion too. In changing the philosophy at the county government, I've been in office a grand total of 15 days. As I said to somebody else, I don't think I've screwed it up yet, but there's plenty of time. There's another 1,446 days to the administration, so we'll see. But on day one, January 1st, I sat in my new office, which is a pretty big office. Come by and visit sometime. It's a pretty nice office. I'm going to spend a lot of time out of it. But I signed an executive order to do a couple of different things. The first thing I did is to sign an executive order to take the name of elected officials off of signage that introduces you to parks and other office buildings. It is a very small thing. It is a very important symbolism. The services and the assets of Westchester County do not belong to the county executive of the moment. They belong to the people of Westchester. There is no reason for you to go into Playland and see my name or Rob Astorino's or Andy Spanos or anybody else's name. It's done. The second thing I did was establish a good neighbor policy. This gets a tad bit wonkish, but because you have elected officials in the room and people who have served in the past and elected officials. What this basically says is that the county government, when it has the right to take action on its own property, Playland, Saxon Woods, the Bronx River Reservation, Ward Pound Ridge, whatever a park or a facility is, we can act unilaterally. We do not need the approval of a local government to do that. But oftentimes those actions have an impact on the community, if not the local government. So there's a new policy in Westchester County. This is the cool part about being county executive, stroke of the pen. Just a signature on a sheet of paper gets it done. It's pretty cool. And what it basically says is we will defer taking a significant action for 60 days. We will have the responsibility to go before the local Larchmont Village Board, Mamaroneck Village Board, Mamaroneck Town Council, any place else in the county, and have our people present to the local board what we plan to do in advance, in public. Not at a meeting in White Plains, in your backyard where you sit and legally have your meeting, and where LMC-TV will cover it on TV for anybody to see that wants to see it. Another plug for LMC-TV. Then, there's a 60-day period after that presentation where the local board can decide to hold a public meeting of its own to get citizen input. We're going to do something to the pump station down on Magnolia Avenue in the village of Larchmont, where Magnolia and I forget the other street that connects into it. Right, Ocean. You see, I'm losing my grip already. And if we decide to do that, and whatever's going to happen is going to affect people, then the Larchmont Village Board should be able to have a public meeting, let the neighbors come in, make their comments, and then at the end of the 60-day period, we invite a letter of support, opposition, or neutrality on whatever our action is. And then we still have the right to act. I mean, we can't give away the right to act. But then we will know firmly what Lorraine Walsh and the members of the Larchmont Village Board and the people of Larchmont Village feel about what we're going to do. And why is that important? If I live on Went Avenue next door to Lynn and Mike Reichgott, and I'm planning to put up a shed in my backyard. They're my neighbors. They're my friends, hopefully. You're friendly with your neighbors, I trust, Lynn. You would go next door and you'd say, Mike, Lynn, I'm planning to do this in the backyard. You want to take a look at the plans? Tell me if there's anything that concerns you. And Lynn might say, I'm a little worried about the drainage, George. You know, this might put a little extra water in my backyard, or the shading is a problem, or something like that. If you could move it, or could you restructure it, or something. And as neighbors, if I can accommodate it, I would. And that's the same concept. The county should be a neighbor to the villages and the town. It shouldn't be, we're bigger than you, tough darts, we're going to do what we want to do. That was my second executive order. My third executive order was to ban the gun show at Westchester County Center. Guns are legal in the society. This is not a debate about whether you have a right to own weaponry. You have a right to own weaponry, in my opinion, under the Second Amendment. But like every other Bill of Rights amendment, there have been regulations by the society, either by the court or by legislation. We have a right to freedom of religion, but we banned polygamy, which affected the Mormon faith of that day, which allowed for polygamy. We have a right to free speech, but we have laws on libel. So a freely spoken phrase that falls into a certain category makes the speaker liable to some sanction. We have freedom of assembly, but you can't go and assemble on the ground on the middle of the Boston Post Road. You can get a permit, and you'll be allowed to assemble and have your free speech in a proper setting. And so, in my judgment, the right to bear arms has reasonable restrictions that are appropriate to it. And one of those things that we've determined is that this is a public exhibition hall. We want family-friendly things there. And we want to be able to choose what we think reaches the broad middle base of family interest. And while there are people in the county who love the gun show, we've got 8,000 people came. I'm not sure they're all from Westchester County, but this is a county of 1 million people. And in this county of 1 million people, our approach to the gun culture is a little different than if you're in upstate New York. So if a county in upstate New York wants to do it, if Dutchess County wants it, it's perfectly fine with me. But in Westchester County, we're not going to have the gun show. And that's going to exist for my term. And then if the Board of Legislators legislates, they may make that more permanent. We have moved some union contracts that were sitting without resolution by the prior administration. The Westchester Community College, the contract for teachers, the contract for CSEA, multiple years they were out, no agreement made. The administration of the community college had agreed to these things. The unions had agreed to. They negotiated, they came to closure. And it wasn't a giveaway, by the way. There's some years of zero in there in these contracts. The money for the contracts was budgeted in the Westchester Community College budget that was adopted. So passing these union contracts had no negative impact to your tax bill. But the bottom line is, and I know I'm in the weeds here, we moved those contracts down to the Board of Legislators. We want to make a statement to our workforce. We're not going to give you everything you want the way you want it. We're going to negotiate, and we're going to be interested in protecting the taxpayers, but we're not anti-union. We don't look at workers as worker bees in a hive. This is proper respect to your workforce. And when we properly respect our workforce, I am confident that they are going to deal with people in the public much better than we've been getting. Because when people feel that they're not treated properly by their management, they reflect that in the way they deal with people in everyday life. So we've done that over the course of these first couple of days. We've started our town hall meetings, which are a little bit different than what you had the last time. Our town hall meetings look a lot like what I've done in this room with first Judy Myers and then later Catherine Parker and Steve Otis, which is sort of a let's get together, let's have a cup of coffee, let's have a nosh, dress casually, and talk about ideas. We started that this weekend at Portchester. We're going to do that around the county. No screening. If you went to any of the prior town hall structures, you know, they want to look in your purse. They want to make sure you don't have any weaponry on you. I'm going to take my chances with the people of Westchester, that if they're mad at me, they'll have a way to express it, and I don't have to worry about what's in their purse, you know, when they come into the room. No pre-screening of questions. You ask whatever you want to ask when you get up to the microphone. By the way, you'll notice I don't have any police Praetorian Guard around me. So far, so good in 15 days. That was an issue in a prior, you can clap for that if you want. There was an issue in a prior election where a challenger at the time challenged the incumbent for always having cops around him and so forth, and then did the same thing, you know, when got into office. I think that's a misuse of police resources. I'd rather have the police out there doing their thing. And like Nancy Seligson seems to travel pretty comfortably around the town without a Praetorian Guard, I think I'll do the same thing, and I think we'll be okay. So, anyway, but what we've started in the first few weeks is really pretty small stuff. It's meant to be symbolic. It's meant to say that there's a different tone, and it's a much more collegial tone. For anybody who was at my inauguration, you heard the speech I gave. It was very much a conciliatory speech. For those who hold conservative views, for those who may be Republicans by being a Democrat, your voice will be heard. You will be included in decision-making. I can't assume we're going to agree necessarily. We might and we may not, but you will still be respected. This disrespect in Washington for the alternate point of view, I don't want that to continue to seep all its way down into Westchester County. And if we hold different philosophical views, we're still citizens together. We're still Americans together. And democracy assumes that there's going to be debate and discussion and disagreement and some resolution. And just like the imaginary shed in the imaginary day when I can own enough money to live on Went Avenue next to Lynn, you work it out. You work it out. And so I hope that we're going to see with the new board leadership that type of mindset, a willingness to work with the legislative body in a cooperative way. I've been a legislator all my career up to now, and in many ways I still think like a legislator does, collegially. How do we get enough other people to support something before you do it? And hopefully that will be a refreshing tone in Westchester as well. We have serious problems facing us. I'm going to touch on one of your questions already because it's the obvious question. And while I talked about trying to get a balance between value and cost in terms of services and taxes, I'm not unmindful that we have the highest tax burden around in the aggregate, and that does include school taxes, county taxes, and municipal taxes. The rough metric, it's not exact, about 65% of your property taxes go to the school district, 20% or so goes to the county, 15% or so goes to your combination of municipal governments, meaning town and village if you live in a village, town alone if you live in a town. That aggregate is among the highest in the nation, if it isn't the highest in the nation. When people say Westchester County taxes are the highest in the nation, the person who doesn't know the specifics think that means that the county government of Westchester levies the highest taxes in the nation, which is not true. But one of the worst things I've ever seen is the finger pointing between levels of government, where some say, well, blame the school board, but the school says, well, we have this, and you don't have that. No. We're in this together. If we're going to get out of this, we're not going to get out of it by pointing, don't blame me, blame him, which is the fallacy of only holding county taxes down. Because if all you try to do is hold county taxes down, but you devolve costs to local governments, and their taxes go up, in the aggregate, the taxpayer is no better off, if not worse off. Case in point, prior administration closed certain shelters in urban parts of the county. We don't see it here, but in New Rochelle, Mount Vernon, Yonkers, White Plains. They closed it in New Rochelle, I think in White Plains. And the impact of that was to have people who were otherwise homeless out on the streets and the sidewalks during weather, appropriate weather, in places like downtown New Rochelle and White Plains. Well, the cost for dealing with that fell to the municipal government of New Rochelle and White Plains. So their costs went up. And the county could proclaim, we didn't raise your taxes, we cut costs, and we closed this bill. Yes, but you didn't make the problem go away. And so it does us no good as a county government to argue that our level of taxation is down, or flat, and somehow we push them to the town, or we push them to the village. That doesn't make any sense. And picking on the school district doesn't solve the problem either, because let's be honest, when you talk to anybody who's moved into town, anybody who buys one of these nice houses or buys a house that's nice and still tears it down anyway, but if the first thing they say is not, oh, I have the best county government. I'm so happy to be here because of your county government. Or, they come in because of the schools, the excellent schools, the commuting to the city, the access to the water, the safe streets. They don't even know what the county government, you live here 10 years, you don't know what the county government does for you. So this is not the time to pick on the school level of taxation. When I had my prior hat on, the solution to our school taxation problem resides in Albany. I'm not there now, and I wasn't very successful in getting a change in policy up there. Hopefully your new senator working with Steve Otis will be. But we face difficult economic picture. I've asked Controller Tom DiNapoli to send a team down to do a review of our county finances. And I'm not interested just in the auditing, do these numbers add up to those numbers and balance out. I want them to look at policies, how we have handled cash, how we have handled the way we have structured our response to the bond rating agencies. Over the last few years, we've had our bonds downgraded. Now, we had a AAA bond rating. We had a AAA bond rating that was downgraded by one of the three rating agencies, and another one of the agencies put us on a negative outlook. That's hardly being at the level of junk bonds. But we have a AAA bond rating primarily because we have a unique provision that no other county in Westchester, no other county in New York State has. We collect 100% of the taxes due from the municipal government on day one. So Nancy Seligson and the people of Mamaroneck Town, Jane Eny is here, I don't know how many other councilors, Sabrina Fiddleman is here. If I'm missing any of the other council members, forgive me as I look around the room quickly. They have to give us 100% of what the tax warrant is. Then they have to collect it. And if there's an in-rem property, if there's a slow payer, whatever that is, they eat the cash difference and they give us 100% of the levy. And that's the other 24 towns and cities do that. It's a unique provision of Westchester. That's a guaranteed revenue stream that has been the underpinning for our AAA bond rating. So to have that kind of guaranteed revenue and lose AAA bond, even at any level, they're looking at your practices and they're finding something deficient. I want to know, what is that deficiency? The campaign is over. I'm not running for re-election today, for 4 years from now. I want to make sure we understand and are transparent to the people of Westchester and the press of Westchester. What is our fiscal situation? What is it that what policies have to change in order to accommodate that? And with that feedback, we're going to get some painful news, I suspect. We're going to get some painful news about where we are with our reserves, and that we've tapped into our reserves in order to balance the budget, and we have less reserves. And all of a sudden, the bond rating agencies look at that, they say, well, politically, you're not committed to raising taxes, you're eating into your reserves, are you prepared to meet your obligations? Many of you have fiscal background, financial background. These are strategies that get you downgraded in your bonds, which means when you borrow money, it's going to cost you more money to do the things. And if you don't think we need to improve our infrastructure in this county, take a drive on the Bronx River Parkway, go take a little stroll in the off-season, it's free in the off-season, take a stroll through Playland and look at how it's deteriorated. Take a walk, it's not our side of the county, but go over to the bike path, running path that we have, the county trailway on the west side of the county, and look at the deterioration. The maintenance we have deferred because we didn't want to raise taxes. Now, I'm not arguing to raise taxes, and I'm not saying in year one we're going to change all these things and make them better. But you must put the cost and the value in some consideration. Because here's the bottom line. You do this in your own life every day. You look at your car and you drive your car. Can I get another year out of this car? Or am I going to get a new one? Can I afford a new one? If you can't afford a new one, what level of affording can you afford a new one? You do this with your house. You got a little leak in the roof. Do you come in and fix the roof? Can you get through the roof for another day? Forget your private house. We have the reverend here, the costs of a church. You don't have unlimited capital to fix the church in its essential need every way the way you want it. You make decisions and you defer, but you can't defer forever because sooner or later the cost is going to escalate and explode. And when you go to the congregants, whether every religious institution has a different way of assessing money, but you've seen what happened. I happen to be Roman Catholic. When it came to that point of time, you started closing churches. Most Holy Trinity is closed. You merged into St. Vito's. Very, very disruptive in the Catholic community. In Portchester, even more so. 4 churches have merged into one because at some point in time, you couldn't support all of those institutions. It is a fiscal decision that was made. So we have the fiscal difficulties ahead. You, the individual taxpayer, me, the individual taxpayer, will now be limited in how much we can deduct on our mortgage and on our taxes. And that is a devastating activity. I will leave it to the folks in Congress to determine if that can be reversed at some point in time. But at this stage of the game, it's going to put tremendous pressure, not just on the county, but on the village, on the town, on the school district. People are going to come and they're going to say, you know what, I don't know nothing about what your costs are. I don't want to look at your budget. I don't care, Malcolm, what choices you have to make. Debbie, I don't care. Ann, I don't care. All I know is I'm not going to pay no more taxes. Cut stuff. I don't know what stuff. I'm not going to stick around to have a detailed conversation about what stuff. That's your job. I elected you to be the village trustee or you to be the school board member. Just cut stuff because I don't want to pay anymore. That's what we're going to face in the county. And we're going to face it having gone 7 years without increasing our tax levy. This past year, his veto was overridden and there's a 2% tax increase. I had a person come up to me and say, you raise these taxes, you're going to send me out of this county. I said, 2% is the only tax increase you've had over 8 years in the county. They looked at me, well, the taxes are still high. I said, they are high. You 20% of your taxes. The guy didn't want to hear, he didn't want to have a discussion about it. He's reacting out of his anger. And by the way, I understand the anger. I understand why that anger exists. But we have a defining moment in government right now. And that is, are we going to dumb it down to the angriest of people and just say, listen, your anger, ill-focused, not backed up by facts is good enough for me, or we're going to try to use this to have a real dialogue with people and hopefully to make a connection and an understanding what is the value of schools in this society, what is the value of the basic services you get from your town and village, and what are the services you get from your county government. Because, my friends, if we don't have that discussion, we're going to descend into a mess here. 50 years ago, we had a year, just in the New York Times today, I've been saying this in some other speeches, so I guess it's going to sound like I'm copying the article in the Times. 50 years ago, I was 14 years old, and I was in high school, and I remember pretty well 1968. Being a sports fan, I remember that 68 was the year of the pitchers. Denny McClain won 30, Bob Gibson didn't give up any runs the whole year. 1968 was the second Super Bowl. Little did I know that 1 year later, my team, the Jets, would be in the third Super Bowl, and then they would never appear again in a Super Bowl. But 1968 was notable for other things. 50 years ago this month, if you recall, was the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. And the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese struck back in a way that was unfathomable. And all of a sudden, Americans began to realize maybe we're not going to win this war. Sad to say, Robert McNamara knew that, and we found out years later. But at that point, the winnable war in Vietnam all of a sudden became questionable. In 1968, we had college students taking over offices of the president of colleges. We had the continuation of what we had had since about 1964, which is unrest in our urban centers of major cities, the frustration of racism and economic deprivation boiling over into street violence in major cities, Detroit and Cleveland and Newark and Oakland and a host of other places. We had the same difficulties and problems in the Middle East with Israel and its neighbors and the constant threat of war. We had the Russian tanks going into Prague to crush the Dubček Prague Spring. We had the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I remember on the radio within the week, I heard the person who was then our United States Senator, in speaking about the death of Martin Luther King, said, "No one knows who will next suffer some senseless act of bloodshed." That person was Senator Robert F. Kennedy. That was 1968. Somehow, we found our way out of that. Somehow. I was a kid, I was in high school, I wasn't involved in making decisions other than what classes I was going to take the next year, where I might apply to college. Did I have enough guts to ask that girl out, which I didn't. Could I perform better when I played baseball in our youth league? But somehow this society worked through these things. We have a tremendous set of problems to face. The national problems are overwhelming. You'll bring Elliot Engel in for one of your breakfasts soon, I'm sure, and he'll talk about the national elections and the national circumstances. But you've given me an opportunity, and you've given me faith, going back 26 years when I first represented Larchmont and Mamaroneck as a 38-year-old county legislator. You gave me a chance. You didn't know I was some guy from Rye who was a councilman, and who is this guy? We've been represented by people from Rye in this county legislature forever. How will he ever really understand Larchmont and Mamaroneck? And so for 26 years, I have tried to understand Larchmont and Mamaroneck as best as I could. You gave me that chance then. You've given me this chance now. I promise you 110% effort. I promise to listen and to try to learn from the advice that I'm going to hear around the room. I'm going to listen to voices that might disagree philosophically to understand if there's something I can learn and benefit from people who share different points of view. But at the end of the day, I'm accountable to you. And next month, and the month after that, and the month after that, I plan to be sitting back in this room with you to listen to other speakers on other topics and to try to be the very best county executive I can, so that you will, at some point in time, not when I'm in the room, but turn to somebody else and say, "I'm glad I worked for that guy." Thank you. So Nina, you want to pose these questions and we'll go from there?
We have a couple more.
Okay.
We asked you to talk about your policy with respect to police participation or non-participation in any ICE raids. And I think the airport privatization is important to us.
Okay.
And I think
And
the
then
Human
the
Rights
commissions.
Commission, yeah, so there's a little more material.
Okay, good. So first of all, the simple ones first. The Human Rights Commission, I think, has been poorly run over the last few years. I was chair of the Board of Legislators when Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Lois Bronze formulated the idea for Human Rights Commission. We felt that it had a public education function and an adjudication of complaints function that were valid and needed. I don't believe it has performed that role. I intend to make significant changes in the personnel. Won't be complete changes, because some of the people there are dedicated and committed, but I expect to see a full overhaul. The planning board for Westchester County does not have the power that your local planning boards do. This, as you know, this is a home rule state. So the planning boards of the villages and the town governments make the decisions as to what happens in a site plan. But the county has a regional overview. Cheryl Louie chaired that board for many years and did a fantastic job. We are, in my judgment, not to insult individuals, we're not getting a fantastic job out of the current planning board, so I intend to change personnel on that. And in fact, in most of our boards and commissions, I intend to winnow out quite a few people and put different folks involved. In fact, for many of the people who've been involved in the transition process, their involvement is not seeking full-time employment with the county. They have their careers. They want to be involved. If people in this room want to be involved, many of you who don't serve an elective office serve as an appointee on one of the villages or town boards for one way or the other. And we're going to seek people to serve in those other boards and commissions. And we have plenty of advisory boards on a host of areas. The Airport Advisory Board deals with airport issues. I think, again, the philosophy of the people on that board are not consistent with my philosophy about the airport, so I intend to make some changes. And I think it'll probably take us 3 months to start to see all of those changes happen. But you'll see a full-scale change in our boards and commissions, and certainly the Human Rights Commission is high on my list for that. On the airport, the Board of Legislators did not accept the deal as presented by my predecessor. They basically had to put together a very difficult, almost a jerry-rigged plan for the budget to make it balanced, to compensate for the fact that the budget that was presented to them was based on a $30 million revenue from doing that deal. In principle, I found that objectionable. That's like putting a gun to somebody's head and said, do this deal, I'm going to give it to you with 30 days, and if you don't do it, you got a $30 million budget hole, which is not the way you should be dealing with public policy. Public policy ought to be dealt with over an extended period of time, discussion, merit, involve people to come in and comment. Then if you decide you want to do something like this, then you go ahead and do it. In terms of the airport deal, I expect that the Board of Legislators is going to have a discussion about not just that deal, but in general. You know, should we change the structure of the way we govern the airport? The basics of the airport deal, if you're not familiar with it, is to simplify it, oversimplify, is to say this. Right now, we have a public-private partnership at Westchester County Airport. The county government contracts with a company, Avports, to run the airport. It is not county employees, civil service employees running the airport. It are employees of a private company. We pay them to manage the airport. I think it's $1 million a year. And we control the decision-making process. What has come up in the last 2 years is my predecessor had plans, first with Oak Tree and now with Macquarie, to restructure what that relationship looks like, giving power to make decisions at the airport to the private entity that manages it. When you give power to make those decisions, there may be little decisions like bringing in Starbucks, you know, which is nice. It may be big decisions like build another parking garage. When you take that out of the control of the county and you give it to the private entity sees ways to do this profitably. So you don't have to pay them to run the airport. They will pay you for the privilege of running it, but they get the power to make the decisions. And that's the problem. You're giving up public authority over something which has impact on the people around it. And you're telling the people in Rye Brook and North Castle and Newcastle, for the sake of this money, the business is going to make the decisions. And if it affects you, you know, tough darts. You always have the right to sue in court, perhaps. But we're going to make that decision on the basis of what's good for us. And right now, we need $30 million. A 40-year deal in which you get $30 million in the first year, and the aggregate amount you get over 40 years is $140 million. Think about that. That's like about quarter of the total amount of money you're going to make. You're going to be given in a one-year upshot just to balance the budget. What happens in year two? You're not getting $30 million in year two, so you're already building in a one-shot negative to your revenue, and you've made a 40-year commitment. And as much as I'd like to think I'm going to have longevity, when that deal is over, take a swing by Greenwood Union. I'll be under one of the trees, and you can leave a little note to tell me how it turned out on the decision I made. So the bottom line is we're going to stretch this out and have a real public policy discussion of whether we should or shouldn't do this. We probably have about 4 months worth of time to make the decision. If we decide to have some modified deal, then we'll have a discussion about a modified deal. You know, it was a bidding process, and you hate to open up a bid and rebid it again because it does seem unfair to the people who went through the bidding process. But we need to think about really carefully what we're going to do before we, in essence, in my judgment, my language, not a legal analysis, sell off an asset like that. And when you give that power to somebody else, imagine if the village board said, we're going to give Flint Park over to an agency, and they're going to run Flint Park, and they're going to give the village board X $100,000 a year. Your village budget looks really good the minute you make that decision, but then everybody who uses Flint Park or the neighbors of Flint Park are going to say, well, they decided to do this, they decided to do that. And you can say, well, you know, it's their park now, you know. They're managing it. They have the power to do that. So you got to think twice before you do that. That's on the airport. Anybody wants to follow up? I know I'm taking a lot of time in narrative. I'll try to snap the other two things up. You also asked me about, I did the commissions, I did the airport. There was one other one you had. Oh, immigration. I could issue an executive order, but the Board of Legislators has indicated that they want to revisit the legislation they had last year. They called it the Immigrant Protection Act, and they want to revisit it, and they want to try to restructure it and submit it as a matter of legislation. So, and make a note, because you don't hear this often, almost every time an executive will preempt the power of a legislature to act, if they can, by acting themselves. And I do have the power to do an executive order, which would apply immediately. But given the legislators' desire to legislate on the topic in a public context, that process will play out. I think at the end of the day, we will come up with a plan that will pass muster with both the advocacy community and, I believe, the law enforcement community. The law enforcement community protested the last time. I'm not sure that there wasn't a thumb on the scale on that one, given the county executive's veto of the final product. But I think there is a balance to be struck here. We want police officers to be able to do their job and to do it professionally. We don't want them to feel that they can't cooperate with other levels of government. But if we're talking about a roundup, then you're going to have to walk in the door with a judicial warrant that justifies the roundup. And by the way, do not believe the argument when somebody says this is a sanctuary county bill. It is not a sanctuary county bill. No local government has the authority to stop the federal government when they come in with a judicial warrant. There is no sanctuary. Religious institutions have certain protections, but not municipal governments. If they have the right piece of paper in their hands, the Larchmont PD, the Mamaroneck Village, Mamaroneck Town PD, and the County PD are going to do what they're told. But there's something different between that and telling your police commissioner, in the case of the county government, that we want you to be Joe Arpaio. We want you to go out and in every interaction you have with people that you think might be an immigrant, we want you to find out whether or not they're documented. And if they're not documented, we want you to pick them up on the spot and detain them and turn them over to ICE. Because Joe Arpaio's philosophy is that this is the single biggest terrible thing in Arizona right now, that there are immigrants in the state. He believes this, and by the way, now that he's been pardoned, he's running for the United States Senate, just in case you didn't know that. I certainly don't believe in that, and I think the legislation that we're looking for, if you ask me to name it, I call it the Community Policing Act, because what do I want? I want a police officer, when they're dealing with someone who is an immigrant, not to worry about their legal status, but to worry about, were they victim of a crime, did they witness a crime, and will they testify? You, just imaginary scenario, you live in an apartment building. Next door, you hear what sounds to you like some guy beating on his wife or his girlfriend. But if you're afraid to pick up the phone and call the police to come and investigate that, because the first question out of their mouth is, where were you born? Where's your documentation? You're not going to pick up the phone and call. If you look out the window and you see somebody stealing a car, don't worry, no one it really is. But if you're looking out and you see somebody stealing a car and you know who that person is, but you're afraid to pick up the phone and call the police, because you think the police is going to, put more priority on deporting you than getting the guy who's stealing the car, then you have hurt the police department's proper effort to work. Now, having said that, there is a normal interaction between all levels of policing, and we have to make sure we protect that. That's the normal consultation. In local government, it's the same way that we consult all the time. I see Nancy or I see Jane. We have conversations across lines, and you don't want to change that into something different. So there's a fine line, and you have to figure out how to write it so that that fine line is protected and the police cooperation exists. But if you're going to come in and do a roundup, you're going to have to come in with proper legal authority to do that. Otherwise, we are not going to turn around and become your enforcement agency for immigrant roundup and deportation. So that is the legislation that is being worked on, or will be worked on in the county legislature. They will go through the process. There'll be a public hearing process. People will comment. They'll tweak it. And I suspect whatever they come back with will be acceptable. I'll participate in the discussions, and I would expect to sign it into law. But we'll let the legislature do that. And by the way, any executive order, including the gun ban, should be that you agree with the policy, should be codified by law. Because if I walk out of here, go across to McDonald's and get hit by traffic, a new county executive can redo every one of my executive orders. Once a law is put into place, a law has to be reversed by both legislature and executive, and that's a much greater protection.
mic now, so that if there's anyone here who has any questions, I will be passing the mic. There we go. You have to speak directly in.
Hey, George, I'm looking for your advice. Many of us are trying to pressure Governor Cuomo to have a special election to fill your seat. Any advice for us?
Well, I think the dialogue to his executive chamber is appropriate. To the extent that I've had a chance to talk with him, we've shared our opinions on it, candidly. I would prefer an election set sooner rather than later. I've expressed that thought, and I think if people from the district express that thought, that's the best case scenario. He has other considerations in mind. You've read about some of them in the newspaper. I think if he has a sense that there's real strong popular support for doing the election sooner rather than later, that would be the right way to approach it. But I will tell you, and you know this, Marlene, you've been an elected official, there's a way to pressure an elected official that becomes counterproductive, and you have to watch out that we don't cross that line. I'm personally a pretty easygoing guy, but many people in public office are not quite so easygoing, and the minute they get a little too much push, they start to, you're pushing me and I don't like it, and they start going the other direction. So I think it has to be on the merits of it, and I'm hopeful that, he hasn't said he wouldn't, he just hasn't done it, and he's got the prerogative to do it.
Maybe I could encourage everybody in the room, but I don't know what my governor did.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Wait a second.
Morning, George.
Morning, Stan.
As you pointed out, the elimination of the deductibility of state and local income taxes is a potentially devastating effect on high local tax jurisdictions. And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to joining in legal action to challenge the legality of the Congress's action, which is the first time in over 100 years since the beginning of the income tax that deduction has been eliminated or limited. There's real issue, I think, about people being taxed on money that they pay in taxes, which is in effect what happens when you don't have the deduction.
Well, I agree with you, Stan. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, by profession, but it does appear to me to be that this is a matter of double taxation. The Attorney General of the state, Eric Schneiderman, has indicated that he would launch legal action. Our County Attorney, John Nona, who's a prominent private sector lawyer who's agreed to come on board with us for a couple of years, is prepared to file, I guess, an amicus brief whenever that comes to fruition. I think the fear we all have is that this is a political decision that may be decided in our favor on the merits in the lower courts, but when it gets to the Supreme Court, which it no doubt will, it'll be decided more on the makeup of the Supreme Court rather than on the pure legal arguments. But I think that's going to be pursued. And, I think the centerpiece of it is going to be what states do. And certainly California, New York, Maryland, Illinois, and Massachusetts, I think, are the lead agents in trying to push this. Probably New Jersey, with the new governor now, will also join on force with that. So I expect you will see legal action. We'll participate in whatever way we can at our level. And if it can be overturned legally, that certainly would make sense. And I think one of the frustrating things, to take your point and go further, made better by other people who deal with this more directly, many of the states that are irritated that they have low taxes and therefore they can't take it off their tax bill, don't want to admit that they are much greater recipients of federal aid. And states like New York, certainly, and California are generators of federal tax dollars far in excess to what we get back. So their resentment on taxation, I view as more about resentment about politics. New York, California, Massachusetts, Illinois, we're blue states, and we lost. And the red states won. And they're going to extract a little pain for the victory. And I frankly don't know how it benefits them directly, but it does hurt us. And I think, if you're sitting in a small town in Alabama, you're kind of happy that New York City and L.A. people are screaming, in their chairs over this taxation. So this may be resolved more by politics than law, but I would agree that there's certainly, as a layman, there's a legal merit to the attack on it, and if it can be successful through that, that would be terrific, if it can come to that. I see Keith's got his hand up, and Lynn, and Andy Spatz, and
Okay.
a host of other
We'll
people.
go
See, it
way
helps
up.
to know everybody in the room. Almost everybody.
Good morning, George. Thank you for being here, and we are very fortunate, not just as a Sound Shore, but as a county, to have you, without saying. You've been pivotal in flood mitigation. You've participated in many of the meetings we've had with the village and town and municipalities, and several members of the Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee are here this morning. Recently, the Army Corps project, we were down in Washington last March with several members of the municipality, village manager, and it's our understanding that the plans have actually been submitted to the Assistant Secretary of Army, OMB, in Congress for approval and funding and authorization, which would be very pivotal to the Sound Shore, assuring a future not only for the residents of the Sound Shore in the town and village of Mamaroneck, but also businesses alike. And we know you've been a champion in making this a forefront issue as a legislator and as you progress. And we're hoping as county executive that we continue this, because when we're talking dollars and cents, it's every dollar counts. And we've really made tremendous progress collectively. And we're hoping that that will continue as well.
My intent would be for the county to budget the amount that the county has to contribute to that. If I forget for the moment the percentages, obviously the feds are the biggest piece, but the state and county had an equal piece, as I recall, and the county has to commit to its piece. And I also know, having served in the state, that if the county doesn't commit to its piece, then the state is going to, not meet their obligation in this. So I would hope we'd be able to do that within our budgetary situation. In general, more cosmic than just that particular case in Mamaroneck Village, which is a merit-based situation. We all know the flooding of the Sheldrake and the Mamaroneck and what it's meant to downtown Mamaroneck. In general, the county government has interpreted its role to be to worry about that which it legally has responsibility to worry about. That is not the answer. That's not the answer on sewer improvements. That's not the answer on anything. We are the regional government. If we have the ability to front the money and then argue about reimbursement later, the work has to get done. I know it's not flood remediation, but we'll talk about sewers. When I was a county legislator, I was an advocate for the county not to sit back and just say, okay, Larchmont, you pay for your little piece and you pay for your little piece. We'll get the work done, and then we'll figure out how to allocate back out the cost, because it is ultimately water that knows no dotted line boundary. When it floods back, you're in the town of Rye and the town of Mamaroneck. Well, whose responsibility is it? It's all of our responsibility. So I would hope that the county would take a broader view, both of flood mitigation and then, as I tied into it, sewer repair. Look, if lightning strikes, you want to talk about a court case, Stan, if we can do what happened 20 years ago with the tobacco industry, and rightfully there's a legal sanction for what the pharmaceutical industry has done in pain-killing opioids, and that there's an understanding that that they owe a contribution back to communities that have laid out money because their products were more addictive than they let people know, and we get an infusion of money, then we have the money to work with, then we can tackle some of these projects, and I would hope that that could happen. That's how it was done 20 years ago. We had the good fortune out of a bad situation, the addictive of tobacco products. Court determined that there had to be reimbursement by the tobacco industry, and that gave the county money for both public education, tax reduction, and then important projects that needed to be done. Nina?
George,
Peggy's
good morning.
Peggy's got it.
Another flood question. There's a surprise coming from me. Anita Lane Bridge, wing wall removal and abutment removal or replacement. That's been on the county books for years. And we in the village have been hearing, it's in design, it's in design, it's in engineering, it's going to be done, it's going to be done. I appreciate you've been in office for 15 days. You don't have an answer on this one.
I'll give you the perfect response, though, because...
Can we find out, please?
Here's what I'd say to do. If the village... we have a Mamaroneck Village trustee in the room? Nora Lucas. Nora? Have the village of Mamaroneck send a letter asking for an update at an upcoming board meeting of the status of the Anita Lane wing wall project, and ask for do it through the village board, a presentation. This is like the good neighbor policy. Ask for a presentation of the status, and send it. Send it to me as a copy, but just send it to me, and then we'll have a public update that will be done before the village board, and then we'll know exactly where we stand on it.
I think Lynn has her next.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, neighbor.
Hi.
Sorry about that shed.
Welcome. We have a growing aging population in the county, as it's clearly not only national but worldwide. And my question is, what can we do about meeting their needs? Be it first through some kind of study, working with the county department for seniors programs. We have growing aging in place organizations in the county that are struggling with sustainability. We're all working, many other organizations also are working on this issue. And I'm just hoping that somewhere in all of this that's going on, that this is taken into consideration.
Well, since I'm aging as well as everybody else is, it has relevance, on a personal level. So it's not one of those things that doesn't really affect me. So I say, yeah, we'll do something about it, but it doesn't stare us in the face. I think probably what we need to do is put some of those people around the table. I mean, we have a senior speak out, legislative speak out is coming up in a couple of weeks, and that's a good forum for people to speak. But individuals will speak about their personal realities. What about this one specific bus route on Central Avenue, or I have this specific problem with, whatever. So I think probably the best thing, and I would say let's go through At Home on the Sound, leadership of At Home on the Sound, and ask for a meeting, which we can easily have, informal meeting in White Plains. May Carpenter come to the table, have Spry, Gramerton Village come to the table. If you want to include, Maria Gallagher as a municipal recreation person, pick a few people and say, we want to come up and talk about some of these issues. We'll put people around the table, have a discussion, see where it takes us. May has got some, May Carpenter is our commissioner of senior services for the county. She's been there for quite a while. She was one of the incumbent folks that I reappointed. And by the way, for the record, I did not come in and execute all of the existing players. I've kept a significant number of those commissioners who worked under my predecessor, because for me it wasn't about politics, it was about performance, and there was good performance from a number of them. We have made changes in other departments, but going to senior services, May's doing this for a long, long time. And if we can have a meeting, around the table on the 9th floor and discuss some of these things, then we'll see what kind of path comes out of it. It is frustrating, though, because so much of the issues we deal with really depend on the demographics of the senior. It's almost like you look at the society as a whole, and there's economic differences and so forth. And then when we all become seniors, well, it's like we're all seniors now. But the same demographic differences exist, and there are seniors who are homeless, and there are seniors who don't have enough to eat, and there are seniors who are otherwise able to age in place if they have the transportation services and other types of things. So it's working on a number of different levels, and many times, and I must tell you, this is true from my past service in the county government, the size of the poor populations in Mount Vernon and Yonkers, and then to the lesser extent Peekskill, Portchester, and other places, dominate our discussions on many of these issues. And we need to make sure that our policies deal with that core responsibility, but also deal with what is happening outside of those core areas as well. Otherwise, we wind up, as you do with the bus system, we have a bus system that serves parts of the county very well, and here on the Boston Post Road, there is not a public bus that goes down this road, it's hard to justify why we don't have that, because we focus where we perceive the need to be totally centered. But I would say that'd be a follow-up by Elaine and the At Home on the Sound people.
The Haven on the Hudson, the information I gave
Yes.
you, George, there also is...
You want to go on microphone for this?
Oh.
Yeah.
The Haven on the Hudson, the group that I gave you the little piece of paper about,
Yep.
that's also an aging in place group, and they're concerned about the buses in Yonkers.
Okay. Very good. We'll get specific.
I think we probably have time for one more. I think Keith was looking to ask.
And if you have individual questions, I usually hang around to be the last man standing anyway, so.
Good morning, County Exec. It's a hot topic, maybe not in the Mamaroneck area, but 95% of the school districts, from an athletic standpoint, as a former player and as a former coach that had the ability to perform at the county center, it's a very hot topic, and I know you're advocating in regard to the 2018 season, which is now in litigation. But hopefully, as definitive as you were with the gun show, I'm hoping that you can really put your fingerprint for the 2019 to bring it back to the county center, because 1933 up to present, it's a tradition, it is an arena, and it's something that anybody that's on the athletic venue really strives for. Your opinion, please.
Well, if anybody's followed me on social media, I've addressed this a couple of times, and I've addressed it in the same way Keith did, except that I didn't play high school basketball. But I went to a high school that was a basketball mecca. I mean, we didn't think much of high school football. Mount Vernon High. We've had NBA players that were classmates of mine and so forth. And I clearly remember having 5 or 6 guys in a car going up to the county center to watch Mount Vernon play New Rochelle, White Plains, all the great rivalries that my high school had. So the iconic nature of it is very clear. It's the same way that if you follow boys football, the state championships are played in the Carrier Dome in Syracuse. And the kids who are playing on these teams, they talk about the striving to get to the physical place, the Carrier Dome, as the place which will establish a state championship. So in the same way, the section, or the countywide as its perceived championship, is there. I had a meeting with 2 of the Section 1 leaders last week. It was not productive in terms of 2018. There are internal arguments. Section 1 is an association which is paid for through BOCES and the various school districts. It's a rather complicated, BOCES is a complicated formula to begin with. And the leadership of Section 1 is responsive to a board, but the board has some members of it that are athletic directors. But there's like an internal big mishigas going on. And it is clear that they felt that the county center proposal on the table to host the boys and girls basketball championships, which usually happen at the end of February, very beginning of March, was not a financially good proposal for them. And when I looked at the proposal, I would be prepared to make some concessions, reasonable concessions. The county still would make money off of it, and so would Section 1, but you just restructure some of the obligations. There's some things they wanted that we couldn't provide because of contractual arrangements that the county already has at the county center with food vendors and the Westchester Knicks and so forth. So some of the things they asked for were reasonable, some of the things were not reasonable or not possible. But it seems to me that there's some attitudinal things in there that caused 2018 not to happen. Now, there is litigation, and the litigation might, judge might say anything. And he might order something, and if he or she does do that, then they do that. But we did agree that we would meet in late March to discuss 2019, that we would do it with a clean slate, and I indicated generically that we would work through and try to come back to a point where we could agree and have them back. And as I said to a friend of mine, the Oakland Raiders came back to Oakland after fooling around in L.A. for a couple of years. The L.A. Rams came back to L.A. after fooling around in St. Louis for a couple of years, so we could get it back into the county center after a slight disagreement. So, you've all been very gracious. I want to thank you personally for your friendship over all these years. And as I said in the opening, hopefully I'll do the things that will make you proud that we're friends.
Thank you, George, very much.
Hi, I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you, George. Our next meeting will be February 13th, a week earlier because of the school vacation. We're going to meet on February 13th, and at that time, we're going to hear about the most recent proposal for the Hampshire property. So we hope to see you back on February 13th.